The white lace of Catherine Porter's wedding dress felt like a noose around her throat as she stood alone in the tiny chapel watching the afternoon sun stretch shadows across empty pews while the preacher awkwardly shuffled his feet and refused to meet her eyes. 2 hours had passed since the ceremony was supposed to begin. 2 hours of pitying whispers and sideways glances from the few guests who had bothered to show up before quietly slipping away. Catherine's hands trembled as she clutched the wilted bouquet of wildflowers, her knuckles white against the dying blooms. The year was 1878, and in Abilene, Texas, a woman left at the altar was a scandal. A woman left at the altar while carrying a child was a catastrophe. "Miss Porter," the preacher finally said, his voice heavy with discomfort, "perhaps it's time we accept that Mr. Whitmore is not coming." Catherine felt something crack inside her chest, a splintering sensation that spread through her ribs like ice breaking on a frozen river. Thomas Whitmore, the man who had courted her with pretty words and promises, who had held her hand beneath the stars and sworn eternal devotion, who had put this child in her belly with whispered assurances of marriage and respectability, had vanished like smoke in the wind. "I see," she whispered, though her voice sounded strange and distant to her own ears. She turned toward the chapel door, each step feeling like she was wading through deep water. The August heat hit her face as she emerged onto the dusty street, and for a moment the brightness blinded her. When her vision cleared, she saw them, the townspeople who had gathered to witness what should have been her triumph, but had instead become her ruin. Mrs. Henderson pulled her daughter closer as if Catherine's disgrace might be contagious. Mr. Morrison shook his head with stern disapproval. Even Sarah Cooper, who had been her friend since childhood, looked away with embarrassment written across her features. Catherine lifted her chin, forcing herself to walk with dignity even as her heart shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She made it 3 blocks before her legs gave out, and she found herself sitting on the bench outside the general store, the wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk. "You look like you could use some water." The voice was deep and warm, touched with a slight drawl that spoke of long days under open skies. Catherine looked up to find a man standing before her, tall and lean with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty boots, worn denim, a leather vest over a faded blue shirt. His eyes were a startling shade of green, and they held no judgment, only concern. "I'm fine," Catherine said automatically, though her voice cracked on the words. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "Begging your pardon, madam, but you don't look fine. You look like someone who's had the worst day of their life." He held out a canteen. "Name's Daniel O'Brien. And before you worry, the water's clean." Catherine hesitated, then accepted the canteen with shaking hands. The water was cool and sweet, and she hadn't realized how parched she was until the first swallow. When she lowered the canteen, she found Daniel O'Brien still watching her, patient as a man waiting for a skittish horse to settle. "Thank you, Mr. O'Brien," she managed. "Daniel, please." He glanced at her wedding dress, at the wilted flowers now lying forgotten on the bench beside her. "I'm new to Abilene, only arrived this morning to meet with a cattle buyer, but even I heard the gossip spreading through town about a wedding that wasn't happening. I'm guessing you're the bride?" Catherine felt heat flood her cheeks, shame and anger mixing into something bitter on her tongue. "I was supposed to be." Daniel nodded slowly, then did something unexpected. He sat down on the bench beside her, leaving a respectful distance, but close enough that his presence felt like a shield against the stares of passing townspeople. "Man's a fool, then." "You don't know anything about me," Catherine said, and she heard the edge of desperation in her own voice. You don't know what I've done, why he left." "Don't need to know the details to know that a man who leaves a woman waiting at the altar is no kind of man at all." Daniel's voice was firm, matter of fact, as if he were stating an undeniable truth, like the sky being blue or grass being green. Whatever happened between you two, there's a right way and a wrong way to handle things. Running away on your wedding day? That's about as wrong as it gets. Catherine felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough in that chapel while waiting for Thomas, cried until her eyes were swollen and her throat was raw. She wouldn't give this town the satisfaction of seeing her break down in the street. "I'm pregnant," she said flatly, surprising herself with the admission. Perhaps it was because Daniel O'Brien was a stranger, someone who had no history with her, no expectations or preconceived notions. Perhaps it was because his green eyes held something that looked like kindness, and she was desperate for any scrap of human decency after hours of whispers and judgment. That's why Thomas left. He said he would marry me, that he loved me, but when it came down to it, he couldn't face the responsibility. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine braced herself for the condemnation she knew was coming. Instead, he said, "How far along are you?" 3 months, Catherine whispered. "Not showing yet, but it won't be long before everyone knows." "And your family?" "Dead. My parents died of fever 2 years ago. I have an aunt in St. Louis, but we're not close, and I doubt she'd want the scandal of an unwed pregnant niece appearing on her doorstep." Catherine laughed, a hollow sound without humor. "I have a little money saved from working at the dress shop, enough to maybe last a month or two if I'm careful. After that, I don't know what I'll do. Mrs. Patterson, the owner, already told me this morning that she can't keep me on once my condition becomes obvious. Bad for business, she said." Daniel turned to look at her fully, his expression serious. "You need a husband." "Yes, thank you for that brilliant observation," Catherine said, her words sharp with bitterness. "Unfortunately, the one I was supposed to have decided he'd rather be a coward." "I wasn't making an observation," Daniel said quietly. "I was making an offer." Catherine's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" Daniel met her gaze steadily. "Marry me. Today, before the sun sets." For a moment, Catherine was certain she had misheard him. The afternoon heat must be affecting her mind, making her hear impossible things. "You're insane." "Maybe," Daniel acknowledged with a slight shrug. "Or maybe I'm just a man who sees someone in trouble and has the means to help." "You don't even know me," Catherine protested, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Why would you possibly want to marry a woman you met 5 minutes ago, a woman who's carrying another man's child?" Daniel leaned back against the bench, his long legs stretched out before him, considering his words carefully. "I'm 30 years old, Catherine. May I call you Catherine?" At her numb nod, he continued, "I've spent the last 12 years working cattle drives, sleeping under the stars, moving from town to town with nothing but my horse and my bedroll. It's a good life in some ways, a free life, but it's also lonely. I've been thinking lately that it might be time to settle down, put down roots somewhere." "That doesn't explain why you'd marry me," Catherine insisted. "A stranger, a ruined woman, someone who brings nothing but scandal and trouble." Daniel turned to look at her again, and there was something in his eyes that made Catherine's breath catch. "You're not ruined. You're just someone who trusted the wrong person. And that's not a character flaw, it's bad luck. As for why I'd marry you specifically, well, I'll be honest with you because I figure we both deserve honesty right now. I've been alone a long time and I'm tired of it. You need protection and respectability, a name for your child, and a roof over your head. I need a reason to finally stop drifting and build something permanent. Seems like we could help each other." Catherine's mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. It was madness, absolute madness. People didn't just marry strangers in the street, but even as she thought it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. This was Texas in 1878, and practical marriages of convenience happened all the time. Women who needed support, men who needed companionship, arrangements struck for survival rather than love. It might be unconventional to meet and marry in the same day, but it wasn't unheard of. "You're serious," she said slowly, studying his face for any sign of deceit or cruel jest. "Dead serious. Look, I'm not promising you romance or grand passion. I'm not going to stand here and feed you pretty lies about love at first sight, but I am promising you that if you marry me, I'll be a faithful husband. I'll provide for you and your child. I'll treat you with respect and kindness, and I'll never, ever run out on you the way that fool did today." Catherine felt something shift in her chest, a tiny spark of hope flickering to life in the darkness that had consumed her since she realized Thomas wasn't coming. "You'd claim the baby as yours?" "I'd raise the child as mine in every way that matters," Daniel said firmly. "Any child you bring into this world will be an O'Brien, with all the rights and privileges that come with it. No one needs to know the details except you and me." "But why?" Catherine whispered, still struggling to understand. "Why would you do this for a complete stranger?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the dusty street where a wagon rattled past, the driver calling out to his horses. "My mother was in a situation similar to yours once before she met my father. She was young and scared and alone, carrying a child from a man who had promised her everything and delivered nothing. My father, he wasn't the biological parent, but he married her anyway, claimed the baby as his own. That child was my older brother, Michael. He died 5 years ago in a cattle stampede, and he never knew the truth about his birth. My father loved him exactly the same as he loved me and my sister. He proved to me that family isn't just about blood, it's about showing up, about keeping your promises." Catherine felt tears spilling down her cheeks now, unable to hold them back any longer. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Daniel replied simply, "or say no, and I'll wish you well and be on my way. But decide soon, because you're right that time matters here. The longer you wait, the more your situation becomes obvious and the harder it gets to claim this child was born to a married woman." Catherine looked down at her wedding dress, at the expensive lace that was now dusty and stained from sitting on the street. She had bought this dress with such hope, such naive certainty that she and Thomas would build a beautiful life together. That dream was dead now, as cold and lifeless as ashes. But here was Daniel O'Brien, a stranger with kind eyes and a practical offer holding out a different possibility. It wouldn't be the marriage she had imagined. There would be no passionate courtship, no gradual falling in love, no certainty of a happy ending. But there would be safety, security, a father for her child, and a man who promised to honor his commitments. After what Thomas had done, after the betrayal and abandonment, perhaps those practical things mattered more than romance anyway. "Yes," Catherine heard herself say, the word falling from her lips before she could second-guess herself. "Yes, I'll marry you." Daniel's expression didn't change dramatically, but something in his eyes softened, warmed. "All right then, let's go find that preacher before he leaves for the day." He stood and offered her his hand. Catherine took it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers as he helped her to her feet. Her legs were unsteady beneath her, but Daniel's grip was solid, anchoring her. They walked back to the chapel together, and Catherine was acutely aware of the stares and gasps that followed them. She could hear the whispers starting up again, spreading through the town like wildfire. The jilted bride was returning to the church with a different man, a stranger, a cowboy no one knew. The scandal was about to get significantly worse before it had any chance of getting better. The preacher was still in the chapel, gathering his things with an air of relief, clearly eager to escape the awkward situation. He looked up in surprise when the door opened, his eyes widening when he saw Catherine with Daniel. "Miss Porter," he said uncertainly, "I didn't expect to see you again today." "Reverend Jameson," Catherine said, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, "I'd like you to perform a wedding ceremony." The preacher's gaze moved to Daniel, confusion written plainly across his features. "But I thought, that is, I was under the impression that Mr. Whitmore had, reconsidered." "Mr. Whitmore is no longer relevant," Daniel said, his voice polite but firm. "I'm Daniel O'Brien, and I'm asking you to marry me to Miss Porter, right now if you're willing." Reverend Jameson looked between them, clearly trying to make sense of this bizarre turn of events. Mr. O'Brien, I'm not sure I understand. You and Miss Porter, are you acquainted? I've never seen you in Abilene before. We're acquainted enough, Daniel said. And as for me being new to town, well, I'm planning to settle here permanently. Already have my eye on some land just outside town that's for sale. Ah, good grazing land for cattle. This seems like as fine a place as any to build a future. Catherine's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't known about Daniel's plans to settle in Abilene, hadn't known he had resources to purchase land. She realized with a start that she knew almost nothing about this man she was about to marry. Nothing except that he had shown her more kindness in half an hour than Thomas had shown in the final weeks of their engagement. Reverend Jameson stroked his chin thoughtfully. Miss Porter, are you certain about this? It's been a difficult day, and perhaps you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months, Catherine said, and she was surprised to find it was true. The fog of shock and heartbreak was lifting, replaced by a sharp, focused determination. Daniel has offered me an honorable proposal, and I've accepted. Will you perform the ceremony or not? The preacher sighed, but he nodded slowly. Very well. Though I must say, this is the strangest wedding day I've ever been part of. We'll need witnesses. I'll find some, Daniel said. He stepped back outside, and Catherine heard him calling out to someone passing by. A moment later, he returned with two men, both rough-looking ranch hands who clearly knew Daniel. Catherine, this is Jim Parker and Henry Wells. They work for the same outfit I've been with this past year, Daniel explained. Gentlemen, you'd be doing us a great favor by standing witness. Jim, a grizzled man with gray streaking his beard, looked at Catherine with surprise but no judgment. Well, I'll be damned. Danny boy, you work fast. Jim, Daniel said warningly. Right, sorry, madam, Jim said, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. We'd be honored to stand witness. Henry, younger and quieter, simply nodded his agreement. They assembled before the altar, the same altar where Catherine had stood hours earlier waiting for a different groom. But this time there was no waiting, no agonizing uncertainty. Reverend Jameson opened his Bible and began the ceremony with brisk efficiency, clearly eager to conclude this unusual day. Catherine barely heard the words. She was too focused on Daniel standing beside her, solid and steady as a mountain. When the preacher asked for the ring, Daniel pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, and Catherine wondered if he had carried it for years, waiting for this moment, or if he had somehow acquired it in the short time since their conversation on the bench. This was my grandmother's, Daniel murmured, as he slipped it onto Catherine's finger. It's not fancy, but it's real gold, and it's lasted 3 generations. Seemed fitting. The ring was slightly loose, sized for a larger hand, but Catherine closed her fist around it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Perhaps it was. Do you, Catherine Marie Porter, take Daniel James O'Brien to be your lawfully wedded husband? Reverend Jameson intoned. I do, Catherine said, her voice steady. And do you, Daniel James O'Brien, take Catherine Marie Porter to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Daniel replied without hesitation. Then by the power vested in me by the state of Texas and the grace of God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. O'Brien, you may kiss your bride. Daniel turned to Catherine, his green eyes searching hers, clearly asking permission despite the preacher's pronouncement. Catherine nodded slightly and Daniel leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in a gentle, chaste kiss that lasted only a heartbeat. It was nothing like the passionate kisses Thomas had given her, full of demand and heat. This was something different, something that felt like a promise, a covenant sealed. When they pulled apart, Catherine realized her hands were shaking. Daniel noticed too and covered her hands with his own, steadying her. It's done, he said quietly. You're safe now. Catherine wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this impulsive decision wouldn't be something she regretted for the rest of her life. But there was no taking it back now. For better or worse, she was Catherine O'Brien, wife of a cowboy she had met less than an hour ago. Jim clapped Daniel on the shoulder with enthusiasm. Congratulations, Danny. You picked a pretty one, even if she does look like she's been through hell today. Jim, Daniel said again, his tone reproachful. I'm just saying she's had a rough time. Anyone can see that, but she's a fighter, I can tell. You'll do all right together. Jim winked at Catherine. Don't let this one push you around, madam. He acts all strong and silent, but he's soft as butter underneath. Despite everything, Catherine felt a small smile tug at her lips. I'll keep that in mind. They signed the marriage certificate, making everything legal and official, and then they were walking out of the chapel into the late afternoon sunlight. The sun was indeed starting to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. True to Daniel's word, they had married before sunset. I have a room at the boarding house, Daniel said as they stood on the chapel steps. It's not much, just a single room. But it's clean and the landlady serves decent meals. We can stay there tonight while we figure out our next steps. Catherine nodded, feeling suddenly exhausted. The emotional roller coaster of the day was catching up with her, and she wanted nothing more than to collapse somewhere private and let herself fully process what had happened. I need to get my things, she said. I've been staying in a small room behind the dress shop. It won't take long. I'll come with you, Daniel offered. They walked through town together, and Catherine could feel the weight of every stare, every whispered conversation. The news of her marriage to the stranger would be all over Abilene by morning, debated and dissected in every home and business. But at least now she was a married woman, respectable in the eyes of society if unconventional in her choices. Her child would be legitimate, would carry the O'Brien name without question, Mrs. Patterson was in the dress shop when Catherine arrived, her expression torn between curiosity and disapproval. Catherine, I heard the most extraordinary rumor. It's not a rumor, Catherine said quietly. Mrs. Patterson, this is my husband, Daniel O'Brien. We were married this afternoon. The older woman's jaw dropped. But Thomas? I thought you were supposed to marry Thomas Whitmore. Thomas decided he wasn't ready for marriage after all, Catherine said, proud of how level her voice remained. Fortunately, Daniel was willing to step in. I've come to collect my belongings. I see, Mrs. Patterson said, though clearly she didn't see it all. Well, I suppose congratulations are in order, though this is all highly irregular. Yes, madam, it is, Daniel agreed pleasantly. But then life rarely follows a regular pattern, does it? If you'll excuse us, we'd like to gather Catherine's things before it gets too late. Catherine led Daniel to the tiny back room where she'd been living since her parents died. It was barely larger than a closet, with space only for a narrow bed, a small trunk, and a washstand. She had tried to make it cheerful with a few wildflowers in a jar and a quilt her mother had made, but it was still a depressing space, a reminder of how far she had fallen from the comfortable home of her childhood. This is where you've been living? Daniel asked, his voice carefully neutral. Mrs. Patterson gave me a reduced rate on rent in exchange for me working longer hours, Catherine explained as she began pulling dresses from the hooks on the wall. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Daniel was quiet as he watched her pack. Then he knelt beside the trunk and began helping her fold garments carefully. His hands were surprisingly gentle for someone who worked with cattle and horses, and he handled her few precious possessions with respect. Did Thomas ever see this room? Daniel asked suddenly. Catherine paused, a chemise clutched in her hands. Once. He said it was temporary, that once we were married I'd never have to live in such conditions again. He promised me a real house, a home with a kitchen and a garden. He said a lot of things. I can't promise you a grand house right away, Daniel said, still folding. But the land I'm looking at, it has a decent cabin on it already. Needs some work, but it's solid. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, a good well. There's a creek running through the property and plenty of grass for cattle. It's not a mansion, but it's better than this. Anything is better than this, Catherine admitted. Daniel, about the land. Do you really have the money to buy property? I need to know what I'm walking into, what kind of life we'll have. Daniel sat back on his heels, meeting her eyes. Fair question. I've been working cattle drives for 12 years. And I've been careful with my money. Didn't spend it on gambling or drinking like a lot of the boys do. I've got about $3,000 saved up. The land I'm looking at is $800 for 80 acres. That leaves plenty for stock, supplies, and getting us through the first year or two while we build up the ranch. Catherine's eyes widened. $3,000 was a substantial sum, far more than she had expected a working cowboy to possess. That's quite a nest egg. I'm good at what I do and I work hard, Daniel said simply. Trail bosses pay well for men they can trust. And like I said, I've been saving for a long time, waiting for the right opportunity. This feels like it. They finished packing in companionable silence, and Catherine found herself studying Daniel covertly as they worked. He moved with an easy efficiency, nothing wasted, every action purposeful. There was something reassuring about that, about his calm competence. After months of Thomas's mood swings and broken promises, Daniel's steadiness felt like solid ground after a long period at sea. When everything was packed, Daniel lifted the trunk easily despite its weight and led the way back out through the shop. Mrs. Patterson watched them go with an expression Catherine couldn't quite read, pity mixed with something that might have been grudging admiration. The boarding house was on the other side of town, a respectable establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Flynn. She was a bird-like woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and those eyes widened when she saw Catherine in her wedding dress following Daniel up the stairs. "Mr. O'Brien?" Mrs. Flynn said, her tone heavy with questions. "Mrs. Flynn, I'd like you to meet my wife, Catherine," Daniel said calmly. "We were married this afternoon. I know I only rented a single room, but I'm hoping you might have a larger accommodation available. We'll need something more suitable for a married couple." Mrs. Flynn's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. "Your wife? But I thought, wasn't there supposed to be a wedding today to that Whitmore boy?" "Plans changed," Daniel said, his voice polite but brooking no argument. "About that room?" "I have a corner room on the second floor," Mrs. Flynn said slowly, still processing. "It's larger, has a proper bed and a sitting area, even a small private porch. It's 50 cents more per week." "We'll take it," Daniel said immediately, "and we'd appreciate discretion regarding our personal affairs." "Mrs." Flynn drew herself up, offended. "Mr. O'Brien, I run a respectable house. I don't gossip about my boarders." Catherine nearly laughed at that blatant falsehood. Mrs. Flynn was known throughout Abilene as one of the worst gossips in town, but she appreciated Daniel's attempt to protect her privacy, even if it was ultimately futile. The corner room was indeed much nicer than Catherine had expected. The bed was large and looked comfortable, covered with a worn but clean quilt. There was a small sofa near the window, a washstand with a proper mirror, and even a small writing desk. The private porch overlooked the street, catching the evening breeze. Daniel set her trunk down carefully and turned to face her. For the first time since they'd met, he looked uncertain, awkward even. "I know this is strange," he said finally. "We're married, but we're also strangers. I want you to know that I meant what I said about treating you with respect. I won't. That is, I don't expect. What I'm trying to say is that you don't have to worry about me forcing myself on you. We can take this as slow as you need." Catherine felt heat flood her face, embarrassed but also grateful. She hadn't allowed herself to think too deeply about the physical realities of marriage, about sharing a bed with a man she barely knew. "Thank you," she whispered. "I appreciate that more than you know." Daniel nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Why don't you get out of that dress? You must be exhausted. I'll go down and see about getting us some supper brought up." After he left, Catherine struggled out of the wedding dress, her fingers clumsy on the buttons. She had imagined Thomas helping her out of this dress tonight, had imagined a wedding night full of passion and tenderness. Instead, she was alone in a boarding house room, married to a stranger, her dreams in ruins around her feet. She pulled on a simple cotton dress and sank onto the sofa, covering her face with her hands. For the first time since the morning, she allowed herself to really feel everything that had happened. The betrayal, the humiliation, the terror of facing an uncertain future alone, and then the bizarre twist of Daniel's proposal and their rushed marriage. It was too much. All of it was too much. She was crying when Daniel returned, carrying a tray laden with food. He set it down quickly and crossed to her, kneeling beside the sofa with concern written across his features. "Catherine, what's wrong? Did something happen?" "Everything," Catherine choked out between sobs. "Everything happened. This morning I woke up thinking I knew exactly what my life would be. I was going to marry Thomas, we were going to have a home together, raise our child together, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a plan. It was something. And then he didn't come, and I realized that nothing I thought I knew was real, that he never loved me at all, that I was just a fool who believed pretty lies. And then you appeared like something out of a dream, offering to save me, and I said yes because I was desperate and scared. But Daniel, I don't know you. I don't know anything about you except that you're kind and you keep your promises. But what if this is a mistake? What if we both end up regretting this?" Daniel let her finish, didn't try to interrupt or quiet her tears. When she finally fell silent, hiccuping and miserable, he handed her a handkerchief from his pocket. "Those are all valid concerns," he said quietly. "And I won't lie to you and say there's no risk in what we've done. Marrying a stranger is about as risky as it gets. But Catherine, I want you to understand something. When I saw you sitting on that bench in your wedding dress looking like your world had ended, I saw someone who needed help. And when I talked to you, when I heard your voice and saw the strength in your eyes even while you were breaking apart, I saw someone worth helping, someone worth taking a chance on." "But why?" Catherine asked desperately. "Why would you take such a chance?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "My father used to say that life presents us with moments of decision, crossroads where the choice we make defines who we are. When I saw you today, I felt something I haven't felt in a long time. A pull, a sense that this mattered, that you mattered. Maybe it's foolish, maybe it's impulsive, but I believe that sometimes you have to trust your instincts. And my instincts said to help you, to offer you a way out of an impossible situation." "And if we end up hating each other?" Catherine asked, though her tears were slowing now. "Then we'll deal with that if it happens," Daniel said pragmatically. "But I don't think we will. I think we have a chance at building something good here, something real. It might not be the fairy tale you imagined with Thomas, but it can be something better. Something based on honesty and mutual respect instead of pretty lies and false promises." Catherine wiped her eyes with the handkerchief, studying Daniel's face in the fading evening light. He looked tired, she realized, the lines around his eyes more pronounced. This had been a long day for him too, arriving in town expecting to conduct simple business and instead ending up married to a pregnant stranger. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "You didn't sign up for a weeping bride on your wedding night." "I signed up for a real marriage with a real person," Daniel replied. "Real people cry when they've had the kind of day you've had. Nothing to apologize for." He stood and moved to the tray of food. "Now, when's the last time you ate?" Catherine had to think about it, and "This morning, I think. I was too nervous to eat much." "Thought so. Come on, you need to eat something, especially given your condition. Mrs. Flynn sent up roast chicken, potatoes, and some kind of vegetable stew. Nothing fancy, but it smells good." They ate together on the sofa, the silence between them more comfortable now. Catherine discovered she was ravenous, and the simple food tasted better than anything she'd had in months. Daniel ate with the single-minded focus of a man accustomed to taking meals when he could get them, not wasting time on conversation while there was food to be consumed. When they finished, Daniel set the tray outside the door for Mrs. Flynn to collect, then stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. "I can sleep on the floor if you'd prefer," he offered, "or on the sofa, though I might not fit well." Catherine looked at the bed, then at Daniel, then back at the bed. They were married. It was their wedding night, even if it wasn't anything like a traditional wedding night, and despite her earlier emotional breakdown, she found that she wasn't afraid of Daniel. Nervous, yes. Uncertain about the future, absolutely, but not afraid. "The bed is large enough for both of us," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We can put a pillow between us if that makes you more comfortable." Daniel's expression softened with something that might have been gratitude. "All right, if you're sure." They prepared for bed with careful courtesy, taking turns at the washstand, changing into night clothes with their backs turned for privacy. When they finally climbed into bed from opposite sides, there was a good foot of space between them, neither quite willing to bridge that gap. Catherine lay staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of Daniel's breathing beside her, the warmth of another body in the bed. It was strange and intimate and completely surreal. "Daniel?" she whispered into the darkness. "Yes?" "Thank you for everything, for not leaving me alone today." There was a rustle of movement, and she felt his hand reach across the space between them, finding hers on top of the quilt. He squeezed gently, a gesture of reassurance and comfort. "You're not alone anymore, Catherine. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." She fell asleep holding the hand of her stranger husband, and for the first time since she'd realized she was pregnant, she felt a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. Catherine woke to sunshine streaming through the window and the sound of someone moving quietly around the room. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, and then the memories of the previous day came flooding back. The wedding that wasn't. Daniel's unexpected proposal, the hasty ceremony. She was married. She opened her eyes to find Daniel already dressed, standing by the window and looking out at the street below. He must have heard her stirring because he turned with a slight smile. "Morning. I tried not to wake you." Catherine sat up, pushing her hair back from her face. She must look a mess, but Daniel's expression held no judgment, only a kind of quiet consideration. "What time is it?" "About 7. I'm an early riser, habit from years of working ranches, but you should rest as long as you need." Catherine shook her head, climbing out of bed. "I'm used to early mornings too. Mrs. Patterson liked the shop open by 8. They shared the washstand in companionable silence, and Catherine found herself sneaking glances at Daniel as she tidied her hair. In the morning light, she could see details she'd missed the day before. A scar along his jawline, probably from some ranch accident. The way his hair curled slightly when it was damp. The careful, economical way he moved, nothing wasted. "I thought we could go see about that land this morning," Daniel said, as he helped her lace up her boots. A gesture so casual and yet so intimate that it made Catherine's breath catch. "The man selling it is named George Mitchell. His wife died last year, and he wants to move back east to be near his daughter. If we like what we see, we can make an offer today." "That's very fast, Westimor," Catherine said, though she wasn't sure if she was protesting or just observing. "We established yesterday that we both move fast when necessary," Daniel replied with a slight smile. "Besides, I meant what I said about wanting to settle down. No point in delaying." They ate breakfast in Mrs. Flynn's dining room, enduring the curious stares of the other boarders. Catherine kept her chin up and her expression serene, determined not to show how much the attention bothered her. Daniel seemed oblivious to the scrutiny, focused entirely on his eggs and bacon. After breakfast, they walked to the livery stable where Daniel had boarded his horse, a handsome buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm temperament. "This is Scout," Daniel said, stroking the horse's nose with obvious affection. "He's gotten me through more tight spots than I can count. Never once let me down." The stable owner provided a small buggy for their use, and soon they were driving out of Abilene toward the property Daniel wanted to see. The morning was already warm, promising another scorching August day, but there was a breeze that made the heat bearable. The land was about 5 miles from town, accessible by a decent road that wouldn't be impassable in winter. As they crested a small rise, Catherine saw it spread out before them. Gently rolling hills covered in tall grass, a line of trees marking the course of a creek, and in the middle distance, a cabin with a stone chimney sending up a thin wisp of smoke. "That's George's place," Daniel said, pointing. 80 acres total, most of it good grazing land. The creek never runs dry, even in the hottest summers. And see those hills in the distance? That's where the property line ends. Plenty of room for cattle, maybe even some horses eventually. As they drew closer, Catherine could see the cabin more clearly. It was built of solid logs, weathered, but well-maintained, with a covered porch and real glass windows. There was a barn behind it, smaller than the cabin but in good repair, and what looked like a chicken coop and a root cellar. George Mitchell emerged from the cabin as they pulled up, a tall man in his 60s with stooped shoulders and sad eyes. "Mr. O'Brien, you came back, and you brought company." "Mr. Mitchell, this is my wife, Catherine," Daniel said, helping her down from the buggy. "We were married yesterday, and we're looking to settle permanently in the area. I wanted her to see the property before we made any decisions." George's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he recovered quickly. "Mrs. O'Brien, welcome. Let me show you around." He walked them through the property with the air of a man saying goodbye to something precious. The cabin was simple but comfortable, with a main room that served as kitchen and living space, and a smaller bedroom partitioned off with a solid door. The stone fireplace dominated one wall, and there was even a cast iron stove for cooking. "My wife loved this place," George said quietly, running his hand along the smooth wooden mantel. "We built it together 30 years ago, raised our daughter here. After she passed, everything just felt empty. Too many memories, you understand?" Catherine felt a lump form in her throat, recognizing the grief in his voice. "It's a beautiful home, Mr. Mitchell. You should be proud of what you built here." George smiled sadly. "Thank you, madam. I am proud, which is why I want to see it go to someone who'll take care of it, who'll fill it with life again. Mr. O'Brien, when we spoke yesterday, you struck me as a good man. Seeing you with your wife now, I'm even more certain this place needs a family again." They walked the property for over an hour, Daniel asking practical questions about water rights and fence lines while Catherine tried to imagine living here, raising her child in this remote but beautiful place. It was so different from town, from the life she had known. But there was something appealing about the solitude, the sense of space and possibility. "What do you think?" Daniel asked her quietly as they stood by the creek, watching the clear water flow over smooth stones. Catherine looked back at the cabin, at the land stretching out in all directions. "It's isolated," she said honestly, "far from town, from neighbors. If something happened, if there was an emergency, we'd be on our own." "That's true," Daniel acknowledged, "but we'd also have privacy, freedom to live our lives without constant scrutiny, and 5 miles isn't so far. We could get to town in an hour if needed." Catherine nodded slowly. "I think it's lovely, Daniel. I think it could be a good home." Daniel's face lit up with a smile that transformed his features from handsome to breathtaking. "Yeah? You really think so?" "I do," Catherine said, and she found she meant it. This place felt like a fresh start, a chance to leave behind the gossip and the judgment of Abilene. They found George on the porch, smoking a pipe and staring out at the land with melancholy eyes. "Mr. Mitchell," Daniel said, "we'd like to make an offer. $800, paid in full, cash. We can complete the transaction today if you're willing." George was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded. "That's a fair price. More than fair, really. I'll accept, Mr. O'Brien. When can you pay?" "I have the money on deposit at the bank in town. We can go there now, complete all the paperwork, and have you on your way by this afternoon if that suits you." They shook hands, sealing the deal, and Catherine felt something shift inside her chest. This was real. They were buying a home, starting a life together. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The next few hours were a blur of legal documents and bank transactions. The banker, Mr. Holloway, looked askance at Daniel and Catherine, clearly having heard the gossip about yesterday's events. But money was money, and Daniel's cash was as good as anyone's. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the property transfer was complete, and George Mitchell was climbing into a coach bound for the railroad station, his few remaining possessions packed in 2 worn valises. "Take care of her," he said through the coach window. And Catherine wasn't sure if he meant the land or the cabin or both. "We will," Daniel promised. "You have my word." They stood in the dusty street and watched the coach disappear around a bend, carrying George Mitchell toward his new life in the East. Then Daniel turned to Catherine with an expression of mixed excitement and determination. "We're landowners now," he said. "We have a home." "We have a lot of work ahead of us," Catherine replied, thinking of all the preparations they'd need to make, all the supplies they'd need to acquire. "True enough," Daniel agreed. "But we don't have to do it all at once. For tonight, I think we should stay one more night at the boarding house, make a list of everything we need, and start fresh tomorrow. What do you say?" Catherine nodded, grateful for his practicality. "That sounds sensible." They spent the evening at the general store going through their finances and making lists. Daniel had been right about his savings. Even after purchasing the land, he had over $2,000 remaining, an enormous sum that would see them through years if they were careful. "We'll need stock," Daniel said, pencil scratching across paper. "At least a dozen head of cattle to start, maybe some chickens for eggs, a milk cow if we can manage it. Seed for a garden, flour and sugar and coffee, tools for repairs, lumber for expanding the barn eventually." Catherine listened to him plan, marveling at how thoroughly he thought through every detail. He wasn't impulsive at all, despite their whirlwind marriage. He was methodical and careful, someone who looked ahead and prepared for contingencies. "I can handle the garden," Catherine offered. "My mother taught me to grow vegetables. And I know how to preserve food for winter. I can sew and mend clothes too, so we won't need to buy much ready-made." "That'll help," Daniel said approvingly. "We'll need fabric, though, and thread, needles, all the supplies for that kind of work." They added items to the list, their heads bent close together over the paper. Somewhere during that evening of practical planning, Catherine realized that she felt comfortable with Daniel in a way she had never quite felt with Thomas. Thomas had been exciting, passionate, but also unpredictable. She had never quite known what mood he'd be in, whether he'd shower her with attention or be distant and preoccupied. Daniel was steady, reliable, exactly what he appeared to be. There was something deeply reassuring about that. That night, they again shared the bed at the boarding house, and again Daniel kept a respectful distance, but when Catherine woke in the early hours, she found that they had both migrated toward the center of the bed in their sleep, and Daniel's arm was draped across her waist. It should have felt strange or uncomfortable, but instead it felt safe, protected. She lay there in the darkness, listening to Daniel's steady breathing, and thought about the child growing inside her. This baby would grow up knowing Daniel as their father, would never know that their biological parent had been a coward and a liar. Daniel would teach them to ride horses and work cattle, would show them how to be strong and honest. It wouldn't be the family she had imagined, but maybe it would be better. The next morning they loaded a wagon with supplies and began the process of moving to their new home. The general store owner, Mr. Peterson, helped them select everything they needed, his wife packing food supplies with careful efficiency. If they thought anything about the newlyweds' unusual circumstances, they kept it to themselves, focused on the substantial sale Daniel was making. By noon, they were driving out of Abilene toward their new life, the wagon heavy with supplies, Scout tied to the back and trotting along placidly. Catherine sat beside Daniel on the wagon seat, watching the town recede behind them. She thought she should feel sad, leaving behind the only home she'd ever known, but all she felt was relief and a strange, cautious optimism. The cabin looked different, knowing it was theirs. Daniel helped Catherine down from the wagon, then swept her up in his arms before she could protest. "What are you doing?" she gasped, clinging to his neck. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," Daniel said with a grin. "Some traditions are worth keeping." He carried her through the door and set her down gently in the middle of the main room. The cabin was empty now, George having taken his furniture with him, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibility. They spent the rest of the day unloading the wagon and arranging their few possessions. Daniel had purchased a bed frame and mattress in town, along with a table and chairs, a dresser, and some basic kitchen equipment. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start with. As evening approached, Catherine stood on the porch and watched the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Daniel came to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. "I'm thinking that 2 days ago my life was completely different," Catherine replied. "I was engaged to a different man, living in town, working at a dress shop. I thought I knew exactly what my future would look like. And now everything has changed. And I'm standing here with you looking at land we own together, and it's strange and scary, but also kind of wonderful. Daniel reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. I know it's all happened very fast, but I meant what I said, Catherine. I'm in this for the long haul. I'm going to work every day to make this a good life for us, for you, and for the baby. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were different tears than she'd shed 2 days ago. These weren't tears of despair and betrayal. These were tears of gratitude and hope. I'm going to try to be a good wife to you, she said. I know I come with baggage, with complications, but I'll do my best. You don't have to prove anything to me, Daniel said firmly. You just have to be yourself, Catherine. That's enough. They stood together as the stars began to appear overhead, brighter than Catherine had ever seen them in town, unobscured by buildings and lanterns. The night air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of grass and water and earth. From somewhere in the distance came the lonely call of a coyote, wild and free. Come on, Daniel said eventually, tugging her hand gently, and we should get some rest. Tomorrow we start the real work of building our ranch. That night, they lay together in their new bed, in their new home. And when Daniel's arm came around her waist, Catherine didn't pull away. She let herself lean back against him, let herself accept the comfort and security he offered. And when she finally drifted off to sleep, it was with a small smile on her lips, dreaming of a future that might actually be worth living. The next weeks passed in a blur of hard work and gradual adjustment. Daniel rose with the sun every morning, often before Catherine even woke, and worked tirelessly on improving the property. He repaired weak spots in the barn, built a proper chicken coop, and dug a new garden plot that he fenced carefully to keep out deer and rabbits. Catherine threw herself into domestic tasks with equal determination. She scrubbed the cabin from top to bottom, sewed curtains for the windows, and began the laborious process of transforming the bare space into a real home. Daniel had purchased fabric in several cheerful patterns, and she used it to make cushions for the chairs, a tablecloth, even a quilt for their bed. They settled into routines and rhythms, learning each other's habits and preferences. Daniel liked his coffee strong and black in the morning, preferred silence until he'd fully woken up. Catherine liked to hum while she worked, found comfort in small talk and casual conversation. Daniel was naturally neat, putting things back where they belonged without thought. Catherine tended toward creative chaos, leaving projects scattered around the cabin until she finished them, but they adapted to each other, compromised without resentment. Daniel learned to appreciate Catherine's chatter over breakfast, found it actually helped him wake up more pleasantly. Catherine made an effort to tidy her projects each evening, creating order from disorder. They were learning to be partners, to work together toward common goals. 3 weeks after they moved to the ranch, Daniel made a trip to a neighboring spread to purchase cattle. He returned with 15 head of mixed stock, including a gentle Jersey cow for milk and several heifers that would drop calves in the spring. Catherine watched from the porch as he drove them into the pasture, working with Scout to keep them bunched and moving in the right direction. Man and horse moved together with a fluid grace that was beautiful to watch, clearly the result of years working as one. That evening, Daniel was too tired to do more than eat the stew Catherine had made and collapse into bed. But he reached for her hand before falling asleep, and Catherine held on tight, marveling at how quickly this simple gesture had become essential to both of them. The physical distance between them was gradually diminishing. They no longer maintained careful space in bed, instead gravitating toward each other in the night. Daniel's goodnight kiss, initially a chaste peck on the forehead, had migrated to her cheek, then to the corner of her mouth. Catherine found herself thinking about what it would be like to close that final distance, to really kiss her husband, but she was afraid. Afraid of comparison, of not measuring up, of revealing too much too soon. One evening about a month after their marriage, Catherine was washing dishes when she felt Daniel's arms slide around her waist from behind. She stiffened instinctively, then forced herself to relax. "Sorry," Daniel murmured against her hair. I should have asked first. No, it's fine, Catherine said quickly. You just surprised me. Daniel didn't release her, instead pulling her back gently against his chest. Catherine, I need to know, are you happy here? Or are you just making the best of a bad situation? Catherine set down the plate she'd been washing and turned in his arms to face him. His green eyes were serious, searching hers for truth. I'm happy, she said, and realized with surprise that she meant it. Daniel, a month ago, I thought my life was over. I was pregnant, alone, disgraced, with no prospects and no future. Now I have a home, a husband who treats me with kindness and respect, a fresh start in a place where the past doesn't matter as much. How could I not be happy? But do you think you could ever be more than just grateful? Daniel asked quietly. Could you ever actually care for me, not just as the man who saved you, but as a husband you chose to be with? Catherine's heart squeezed in her chest. She reached up to touch his face, feeling the roughness of his jaw under her fingertips. Daniel, I already care for you, more than I expected to, more than I'm entirely comfortable with, if I'm honest. You make me feel safe in a way I've never felt before. When I wake up in the morning, you're the first thing I think about. When something good happens, you're the person I want to tell. When I'm worried or scared, having you near makes it better. If that's not caring, I don't know what is. Daniel's eyes darkened with emotion, and he cupped her face in both hands. Can I kiss you? Really kiss you? Catherine's breath caught, but she nodded. Yes. Daniel lowered his head slowly, giving her time to change her mind, to pull away. But Catherine didn't pull away. She rose up on her toes to meet him halfway, and when their lips finally met, it was like lightning striking, electric and powerful and undeniable. This wasn't the chaste kiss from their wedding ceremony. This was passion and longing and promise. Daniel's mouth moving over hers with a hunger he'd clearly been suppressing for weeks. Catherine clutched his shoulders, kissing him back with equal fervor, years of loneliness and fear and doubt melting away under the heat of his touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day we met, he admitted roughly. Watching you sitting on that bench in your wedding dress looking so beautiful and so broken, I wanted to kiss you and promise that everything would be all right. Why didn't you? Catherine whispered. Because you needed time, needed space to heal. I didn't want to rush you, didn't want you to feel obligated or pressured. Daniel stroked her cheek with his thumb. I wanted you to choose me, Catherine. Not because you were desperate or because I was convenient, but because you actually wanted to be with me. I want to be with you, Catherine said, her voice clear and certain. I choose you, Daniel, not out of obligation or gratitude, but because in the past month you've shown me what a real partnership looks like. You've shown me that marriage can be about respect and teamwork and genuine affection. I didn't have that with Thomas. I see that now. What we had was infatuation and heat, but no real foundation. What we have is something better, something that will last. Daniel kissed her again, deeper this time, and Catherine felt the last of her reservations crumble. When he scooped her up in his arms and carried her to the bedroom, she didn't protest. When he laid her on the bed and looked at her with a question in his eyes, she reached up and pulled him down to her. That night, their marriage became real in every sense of the word. Daniel was gentle and patient, taking his time to ensure Catherine's comfort and pleasure. There was passion, yes, but also tenderness. A sense of two people coming together not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. When Catherine finally fell asleep in Daniel's arms, completely sated and deeply content, she knew that she had found something precious, something worth fighting for. The seasons shifted, summer fading into autumn. Catherine's pregnancy became obvious, her belly rounding beneath her dresses. They made occasional trips to Abilene for supplies, enduring the curious stares and whispered comments. Some people counted months on their fingers and raised eyebrows doing the math. But Daniel met every look with a steady gaze and a protective hand on Catherine's back, daring anyone to question his wife's respectability. Catherine found she didn't care what the gossips said anymore. Let them talk. Let them speculate. She knew the truth of her marriage, knew that Daniel loved her and she loved him. That was all that mattered. As autumn deepened into winter, they prepared the ranch for the cold months ahead. Daniel chopped wood until they had a massive pile stacked against the cabin wall, enough to last through the worst of the Texas winter. Catherine preserved vegetables from the garden, filling the root cellar with jars of tomatoes, beans, and pickles. They salted and smoked meat, stored grain for the livestock, and generally did everything possible to ensure they wouldn't need to make the trip to town during the worst weather. On a cold December evening, with snow falling softly outside, Catherine felt the first stirrings of labor. She'd been expecting it, calculating that the baby would come sometime in early December based on when she'd last seen her monthly courses. But the reality of it was still frightening. The knowledge that within hours she would give birth would finally meet this child she'd been carrying for 9 long months. "Daniel," she called out, trying to keep the panic from her voice, "it's time." Daniel had been feeding the fire, but he dropped the log he was holding and rushed to her side. "You're sure? The pain started about an hour ago, but they're getting closer together now. We should probably send for the midwife." Catherine winced as another contraction rolled through her abdomen, stronger than the last. Right, yes, the midwife. Daniel looked slightly panicked himself, which Catherine found oddly comforting. At least she wasn't the only one terrified. Daniel rode through the snow to fetch Mrs. Anderson, an experienced midwife who lived about 3 miles away. He returned within the hour. Mrs. Anderson bundled up behind him on Scout, her medical bag clutched tightly. "Let's see what we have here," Mrs. Anderson said briskly, taking command of the situation with the confidence of someone who delivered hundreds of babies. She examined Catherine efficiently, then nodded. "First baby, so it'll take a while, but everything looks good. You're young and healthy, and the baby seems to be positioned correctly. We'll have you holding your little one by morning, I'd wager." The labor was long and difficult, as first labors often were. Catherine walked, squatted, breathed through contractions that felt like they were tearing her apart. Daniel stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand, supporting her weight when she needed to move, murmuring encouragement even when she cursed him for getting her into this situation in the first place. "You're doing beautifully," he kept saying. "You're so strong, Catherine. I'm so proud of you." As dawn broke cold and clear, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, Catherine gave one final push and felt the baby slip free. There was a moment of breathless silence, and then a thin, angry wail filled the cabin. "It's a boy," Mrs. Anderson announced, holding up a squirming, red-faced infant. "A big, healthy boy." Catherine collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure, but flooded with relief and joy. Mrs. Anderson cleaned the baby efficiently, then placed him in Catherine's arms, wrapped in the softest blanket Catherine had sewn months ago in preparation. The baby was beautiful, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn brown or green. He had tiny, perfect fingers that curled around Catherine's thumb when she offered it, and a rosebud mouth that searched instinctively for food. "Hello, little one," Catherine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to the world." Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the baby with wonder written across his features. "He's perfect," he breathed. "Catherine, he's absolutely perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" Catherine asked, offering the bundle. Daniel's hands shook as he accepted the baby, cradling him with a gentleness that belied his size and strength. "Hey there, son," he murmured. "I'm your papa. I'm going to take such good care of you, I promise. You and your mama, you're my whole world now." Catherine felt fresh tears well up, watching her husband bond with a child who wasn't biologically his but would be his in every way that truly mattered. This was what love looked like, she realized. Not grand gestures or passionate declarations, but this quiet moment of a man choosing to be a father, choosing to claim a child as his own. "What should we name him?" she asked. Daniel looked up from the baby, meeting her eyes. "I've been thinking about that. What would you say to James? It's a strong name, traditional. And we could call him Jamie when he's small." "James O'Brien." Catherine tested the name. "I like it. Jamie for now, James when he's grown." Mrs. Anderson stayed for a few hours to ensure both Catherine and the baby were doing well, then accepted Daniel's generous payment and headed home through the snow. Before she left, she pulled Daniel aside. "You're a good man, Daniel O'Brien," she said quietly. "That woman in there, she's been through hell and come out the other side stronger. You take care of her." "With my life," Daniel replied simply. The days after Jamie's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, of learning how to care for a tiny, helpless human who depended entirely on them for survival. But they were also days of profound joy, of watching Jamie discover the world, of seeing his first smile and hearing his first laugh. Daniel was a natural father, patient and gentle with the baby. He walked the floor with Jamie when the little one was fussy, sang off-key lullabies, and changed diapers without complaint. He built a beautiful wooden cradle that rocked gently, carved with intricate patterns of horses and stars. Winter passed slowly, the ranch frozen and quiet. They were isolated for weeks at a time, but Catherine didn't mind. Their little cabin felt like a world unto itself, complete and sufficient. The three of them, a family. Spring came with a rush of green growth and new calves being born in the pasture. Catherine, recovered from childbirth and eager to be useful again, worked in the garden while Jamie napped in a basket nearby. She planted vegetables and herbs, even some flowers to brighten up the place. Daniel expanded the herd, purchasing more cattle and beginning to establish a reputation as a reliable cattleman. Neighboring ranchers started coming by to seek his advice, impressed by his knowledge and work ethic. The O'Brien ranch was small but well run, and it showed. On their first anniversary, Daniel surprised Catherine with a gift, a beautiful mare with a gentle temperament and soft brown eyes. "Her name's Willow," he said. "I thought you might like to learn to ride so we can explore the property together. And when Jamie's older, he'll need to learn too." Catherine threw her arms around Daniel's neck, kissing him soundly. "Thank you for everything, for this past year, for being such a wonderful husband and father, for making me happier than I ever thought possible." "You don't need to thank me," Daniel said, holding her close. "Being with you, building this life together, watching Jamie grow, it's everything I ever wanted and more." They stood together in the afternoon sunshine, Jamie babbling happily in Catherine's arms, the ranch spread out around them, green and prosperous. Catherine thought about that terrible day a year ago when she'd stood in the chapel, abandoned and heartbroken, thinking her life was over. How wrong she'd been. Her life hadn't ended that day. It had begun. The years flowed past like water in the creek, steady and sure. Jamie grew from a baby into a curious toddler, then an energetic boy who followed Daniel everywhere, eager to learn about ranching and horses and the wide world around him. He had Daniel's green eyes and Catherine's smile, and everyone who met him remarked on what a fine son the O'Briens had. When Jamie was 3, Catherine became pregnant again, this time with Daniel's biological child. She gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, called Lizzie, who had her father's dark hair and her mother's delicate features. 2 years later came another son, Michael, named for Daniel's brother. The cabin, once so spacious for 2, became comfortably crowded with the noise and chaos of children. Daniel expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The ranch prospered, growing from 15 head of cattle to over 100. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men who lived in the bunkhouse Daniel built near the barn. Catherine became known in Abilene for her preserves and her fine sewing, selling her goods in town and earning her own money that she saved carefully. She was no longer the ruined woman who'd been abandoned at the altar. She was Mrs. O'Brien, respected rancher's wife, mother of 3 beautiful children, a woman who had overcome scandal and built a good life through determination and grace. Sometimes when Catherine was in town, she would hear news of Thomas Whitmore. He'd left Texas entirely, she learned, moved to California chasing gold and adventure. He'd never married, never settled down, still running from responsibility and commitment. Catherine felt nothing when she heard his name. No anger or bitterness, not even curiosity. He was part of a past so distant it felt like it had happened to someone else entirely. On a warm summer evening when Jamie was 8, Lizzie was 5, and Michael was 3, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky. The children were tired from a day of play, Lizzie dozing against Catherine's shoulder while Michael sprawled across Daniel's lap. Jamie, too big to cuddle, but still young enough to need closeness, sat pressed against Daniel's side. "Papa," Jamie said thoughtfully, "Tommy Henderson said that I don't look like you or Mama. He said I must be adopted or something." Catherine tensed, but Daniel's expression remained calm. He'd known this conversation would come eventually, had discussed with Catherine how they would handle it. "Well, Jamie, Tommy Henderson doesn't know what he's talking about," Daniel said easily. "You look like your mama around the eyes and mouth. But you know what? Even if you didn't look like us, even if you'd been adopted, it wouldn't matter one bit. Because family isn't just about who you look like or where you came from. Family is about love and loyalty and showing up every single day. And you, son, are my family in every way that counts." Jamie seemed satisfied with that answer, nodding and leaning more heavily against his father. Catherine met Daniel's eyes over the children's heads, silently thanking him for his wisdom and love. When the children were finally asleep in their beds, Catherine and Daniel sat together on the porch swing Daniel had built, moving slowly back and forth in the evening breeze. "Do you think we should tell him the truth someday?" Catherine asked quietly. "About Thomas, about how we really met." Daniel considered the question carefully, as he always did. "Maybe when he's older, when he can understand the full story, but honestly, Catherine, I don't think of it as a secret we're keeping. I think of it as history that's not particularly relevant anymore. I'm his father in every way that matters. His biological origin doesn't change that." "You're an amazing man, Daniel O'Brien," Catherine said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Did you know that the day we met I thought you were either crazy or dangerous, proposing to a complete stranger?" Daniel chuckled. "And I thought you were either desperate or brave, accepting a proposal from a man you'd known for 30 minutes. "We were both right," Catherine said with a smile. "I was desperate and brave. You were a little crazy, but in the best possible way." "No regrets?" Daniel asked, tilting her face up to look at him. "Not a single one," Catherine replied honestly. "You gave me everything, Daniel. A home, a family, a second chance at happiness when I thought I'd lost any right to it. How could I possibly regret that?" Daniel kissed her softly, tenderly, with the comfortable familiarity of two people who knew each other's hearts completely. "I got just as much as I gave, Catherine. You made me want to stop drifting, want to build something permanent. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to be better than I was. These past years with you and the children, they've been the best of my life." They sat together as the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning all those years ago. The ranch was quiet around them. The cattle settled for the night, the horses dozing in the barn, the children safe and warm in their beds. Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain and betrayal of being left at the altar, the terror of facing an uncertain future alone and pregnant, the bizarre twist of fate that had brought Daniel into her life at exactly the right moment, the gradual building of trust and affection that had blossomed into genuine love. If someone had told her on that terrible wedding day that within hours she'd be married to a different man, that within a year she'd be deeply in love and happier than she'd ever been, she would have thought them insane. Life didn't work that way, didn't offer fairy tale solutions to real problems, but sometimes, just sometimes, it did. Sometimes a cowboy appeared when you needed him most, offering salvation wrapped in a practical proposal. Sometimes what started as convenience became the truest love you'd ever known. Sometimes the worst day of your life was actually the beginning of your best life. "What are you thinking about, Henry?" Daniel asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am," Catherine replied, "for that day, for your courage in approaching a stranger and offering help, for every choice we've made since then that brought us here." "I'm grateful too," Daniel said, "for your bravery in accepting my proposal, for your strength in building this life with me, for giving me a family I never thought I'd have." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, then headed inside to their bedroom. The room they'd shared for 9 years now, the heart of their home and their marriage. As Catherine settled into bed, Daniel beside her as always, his arm coming around her waist in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing, she reflected on the strange and wonderful trajectory of her life. She'd been Catherine Porter, the abandoned bride, the scandal of Abilene. Now she was Catherine O'Brien, wife and mother, rancher and businesswoman, a woman who had overcome heartbreak and built something beautiful from the ashes. And it had all started with a cowboy who saw someone in need and didn't hesitate to help, who understood that family was built through choice and commitment rather than just blood and biology, who proved every single day that keeping your promises was the foundation of love. The years continued their steady march forward. Jamie grew into a tall, capable young man who was a natural with horses and had his father's steady temperament. At 18, he announced his intention to expand into horse breeding, having developed a real talent for training and gentling wild mustangs. Daniel gave him 20 acres on the far corner of their now 200-acre ranch to start his own operation, and within 2 years, Jamie's horses were in high demand throughout Texas. Lizzie, softer and more artistic than her brothers, surprised everyone by developing a passion for veterinary medicine. She apprenticed with the veterinarian in Abilene, one of the few women in the field, and eventually took over his practice when he retired. She married a teacher named Robert Mitchell, and they built a house in town. Though she visited the ranch frequently to check on the livestock, and Catherine suspected to get her mother's advice on managing married life. Michael, the youngest, had his mother's head for business and his father's love of ranching. He managed the day-to-day operations of the O'Brien Ranch, implementing new techniques and technologies that increased both their productivity and profitability. He married his childhood sweetheart, Anne, and they built a house on the property, close enough to help, but far enough to have their own space. Daniel and Catherine, now in their 50s, slowly handed over more responsibility to their children, while enjoying the fruits of decades of hard work. They took trips occasionally, visiting places they'd never had time to see when they were building the ranch. They went to San Antonio, to New Orleans, even to St. Louis, where Catherine's aunt had long since passed away, but where they enjoyed exploring the city. But they always returned to the ranch, to the land they'd built together, the home that held all their memories. The cabin, though expanded and improved over the years, still had the original stone fireplace where they'd sat on countless winter evenings. The porch swing still hung in the same spot where they'd resolved arguments and celebrated triumphs and simply enjoyed each other's company. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. There were 12 grandchildren now, ranging from Jamie's oldest at 15 down to Michael and Anne's youngest, a baby girl of just 6 months. The house and yard overflowed with family, with laughter and love and the chaos of multiple generations coming together. After dinner, after the presents had been opened and the cake had been consumed, Jamie stood up and clinked his glass to get everyone's attention. "I want to say something," he announced, his voice carrying over the conversations. "Ma, Pa, 30 years ago you two got married under unusual circumstances. I know the story you told me when I was 16 and could understand it properly. Ma had been left at the altar by a man who wasn't worth the dirt on his boots. Pa saw someone in trouble and stepped in to help even though you barely knew each other. You married before the sun set that same day, starting this adventure together." He paused, his eyes shining with emotion. What you built together, it's incredible. Not just this ranch, though, that's impressive enough, but this family, this legacy of love and commitment and showing up no matter what. Pa, you claimed me as your son when you didn't have to. Loved me as if I were your blood from the very beginning. That taught me what it really means to be a father, that it's not about biology, but about choice and dedication. Ma, you showed me that strength isn't about never being knocked down, but about getting back up and building something better than you had before. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, and she felt Daniel's hand close around hers, strong and steady as always. What I'm trying to say, Jamie continued, is thank you. Thank you for giving all of us this foundation, this example of what marriage and family should look like. You've been through hard times and good times, and you faced it all together. That's what we all aspire to, what we hope we can give to our own children. So here's to 30 more years, and to the love story that started with a cowboy, a wedding dress, and a sunset deadline. Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the toast, and Catherine found herself pulled into Daniel's arms, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they'd created together. Later that night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Catherine and Daniel walked out to the creek, the place where they'd stood 30 years ago and decided to buy this land, to build this life. Do you remember standing here that first time? Catherine asked, the moonlight silvering the water before them. Every detail, Daniel confirmed. You said it was isolated, that we'd be on our own if something happened. I said we'd have privacy and freedom. We were both right. We usually are between the two of us, Catherine said with a smile. You bring the practicality, I bring the worry, and somehow we arrive at the right answer. Daniel laughed, the sound warm and familiar. I think you sell yourself short. You've brought a lot more than worry to this partnership. You've brought strength and grace and a capacity for forgiveness that still amazes me. Forgiveness? Catherine questioned. For Thomas, for the people who judged you, even for yourself. You could have spent the rest of your life angry and bitter, and no one would have blamed you. Instead, you chose to move forward, to build something new. That takes incredible strength. Catherine leaned against Daniel's side, fitting into the curve of his body as perfectly as she had for 3 decades. I had a good partner for the building. We've been lucky, Daniel said quietly. Not everyone gets a second chance like we did. Not everyone finds love in unexpected places. It wasn't luck, Catherine corrected gently. It was you, Daniel. It was you choosing to help a stranger when you didn't have to. It was you keeping your promises even when it must have been difficult. It was you building this life with patience and dedication and love. Daniel turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Even in the moonlight, his green eyes were as vivid as ever, though now framed by laugh lines and the marks of years spent outdoors. Catherine O'Brien, I would do it all again. Every moment, every decision, every challenge. I'd marry you 1,000 times over in 1,000 different lives. Even knowing what you were getting into, Catherine teased, a pregnant bride, a scandal, all those years of hard work building this place. Especially knowing all that, Daniel said seriously, because it brought me you, brought me Jamie and Lizzie and Michael, brought me grandchildren and this full, rich life I never imagined I could have. That day in Abilene, when I saw you sitting on that bench in your wedding dress, it was the best day of my life. Not because I knew what would happen, but because I took a chance on something that mattered. Catherine reached up to cup his face, feeling the beloved contours that were as familiar to her as her own. I love you. Daniel O'Brien. More now than ever. And I didn't think that was possible. I love you too, Catherine. Always have, always will. They kissed there by the creek, under the Texas stars, 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful that would outlast them both. Their children would carry on the ranch, would pass down the stories of how their parents met and married in a single dramatic day. Their grandchildren would grow up knowing that real love wasn't always neat or conventional, that sometimes the best things came from taking risks and trusting in kindness. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Catherine thought about all the ways her life could have gone wrong. If Daniel hadn't been in Abilene that day, if he hadn't approached her, if she'd been too proud or too scared to accept his proposal, she would have ended up in some desperate situation, struggling alone to raise Jamie, probably bitter and hardened by life's cruelties. Instead, she had lived a life full of love and purpose, had raised 3 wonderful children, had built a successful ranch and a strong marriage. She had proved that a person's worth wasn't determined by their worst moment or their biggest mistake. She had shown that with courage and the help of a good partner, anyone could overcome scandal and heartbreak to find happiness. The house was quiet when they entered. Everyone settled in for the night. Daniel banked the fire while Catherine blew out the lamps, the domestic rituals of decades performed without conscious thought. In their bedroom, they prepared for bed with the ease of long practice, each knowing the other's routines perfectly. As they lay together in the darkness, Catherine felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. This was her life. These were her people. This was her home. It hadn't started the way she'd expected, hadn't followed any traditional path, but it had brought her to exactly where she was meant to be. "Catherine?" Daniel's voice was drowsy, heavy with approaching sleep. "Yes?" "Thank you for saying yes that day. Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger who probably seemed crazy." Catherine smiled into the darkness. "Thank you for asking. Thank you for seeing someone worth saving when everyone else just saw a scandal." "You were always worth it," Daniel murmured. "Always." They drifted off to sleep, their bodies curved together as they had been for 30 years, secure in the knowledge of their love and the legacy they'd created. Outside, the ranch spread out under the stars, a testament to what could be built when 2 people committed to working together, to honoring their promises, to choosing love every single day. The story that had begun with heartbreak and ended with healing, that had started with a desperate proposal and grown into a true partnership, was now part of the land itself, woven into every fence post and barn beam, living in the voices of children and grandchildren who carried the O'Brien name with pride. Catherine Porter, who had once stood alone in a wedding dress while the man she thought she loved abandoned her, had become Catherine O'Brien, beloved wife, devoted mother, successful businesswoman, and the heart of a thriving family. And it had all happened because a cowboy named Daniel had seen someone in need and offered help, because they had married before the sun set on that fateful day, because they had both been brave enough to trust in something as simple and profound as kindness. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of rose and gold, the O'Brien Ranch woke to another day. Cattle lowed in the pastures, horses whinnied in the barn, and in the main house a family continued the legacy of love that had started 30 years ago with an unlikely marriage and an even more unlikely happy ending. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through generations. A story that proved that sometimes the worst moments in life were actually doorways to the best moments, that courage could come in unexpected forms, and that real love, the kind that lasted, was built not on passion or romance alone, but on respect, commitment, and the daily choice to show up for each other no matter what. Catherine and Daniel O'Brien had shown that true family was created through choice and devotion, that second chances were precious gifts not to be wasted, and that a life built on promises kept was a life worth living. Their story, beginning with abandonment and ending in fulfillment, with all the struggles and triumphs in between, was complete, and it was beautiful.